welcome to a discussion generating session. So our idea here is to try to get us to talk about certain ideas. A couple of logistic things. All of you who I've yelled at not to sit in the third row, I apologize for that. But that's so that we can have the roving mics go in front of the, behind the cameras rather than in front of them. And I also have been asked to, and by the way, most people are sitting over here on this side of the room, which makes sense. You could sneak in and out if you need to. But if you're on this side of the room and you need to sneak out, you can come down the stairs and walk through our safely cleared third row in order to sneak out and come back in. Oh, but don't sneak out because of what I'm saying. You can only sneak out if you actually desperately need the loo or something. Antonella has asked me to mention the beautiful brochures that Promoter has made on both the project, but then also on our work package 5. So they're out for you to collect if you haven't collected one already on the sort of main conference desk, which is just that table between, on the catering. And our sister project VAST has also sent along a very nice brochure. So if you haven't seen that, go ahead and take a look. So what we want to do in this session is to try to get a discussion going. And we've set up kind of a somewhat artificial way of talking about the session. So what we've got is, I'm trying to turn. I've done an Ole Marius. There we go. So what we're trying to do in this session is to get a discussion going, and in kind of a informal way. A formal way, sort of a artificial way, maybe. So we've got some rules about the discussion. So we're going to assign everybody a group number 1, 2, 3, or 4. And what we're going to do is we're going to divide the room in quadrants. So I think that sort of right about here is a quadrant. So everybody who's on stage right, which means that side of the room, is in, I've moved out of, sorry, Daniel, I've moved off my podium. So on that side of the room, I'll tell you which group you're in first, and then on that side of the room, you're in another group. So group 1 is the one in the front of the room, and about halfway back. Group 2 is in the front of the room, about halfway back. Group 3 is in the back of the room, about halfway across, a little more towards the your right, and then group 4 is in the back. And so I'm going to give you a provocation, and each group gets to talk about their provocation. We're going to start by having 10 minutes where you can discuss in your groups. So you might need to stand up and sort of come together. And what we want you to do is to nominate one person who's going to spark the discussion in the next part. And that person will need to make a short summary. And I'm going to be bossy. And so if the person is making a long summary, I might say, that's enough, let's let some other people speak. We'll do that. And each provocation is addressed for 10 minutes in numerical order. So we'll start with group 1, and then group 2, and then group 3, and group 4. So once we get to the sort of public part, so after in another few minutes, it'll be 10 minutes, and then we'll come back to the whole group. Each group has one person that kicks off, and then anybody in the room that wants to speak can. But be aware that we have 10 minutes for each provocation. So if you take 5 minutes to say your question, that doesn't allow too much time for discussion, so try to be brief, which is hard because we're all really interested in lots of stuff. So these are the provocations. And I'll put it on here so you can see it. And provocation 3 didn't get on my thing, so let's put them all on. So provocation 1 is that value tensions cannot be managed or mitigated. So the whole idea behind the UNCHARTED project is to think about ways to deal with managing or mitigating cultural tensions, value tensions. So our provocation is they can't be managed. So what do you think about this? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? The second one over here, group 2, is that value tensions are useful or productive, because it seemed to Oliver and me is that the Uncharted project has a tendency to think that value tensions are something that needs to be managed or moderated, so that suggests that they're bad. So do you think that they're bad, or are they good, or where is the balance? The third one towards the back on that side, there are different kinds of value tensions, and these must be distinguished. So not all value tensions are alike. And we put this provocation because in the project, now I don't think that actually individuals in the project actually think they're all the same, we don't, but we often talk about value tensions in Uncharted as if they're one kind of thing. So the question is, are they different kinds of things? Do you agree or disagree, and in what way? And then over here on the back is cultural policy should aim to resolve value tensions in society. So since part of our aim in the project is to be thinking about how we can make cultural policy interventions, the question is this something that cultural policy should do? So 10 minutes from now, get into your groups and have a quick discussion, and then we'll move on to the next part. Does that all make sense? I hope. So group 1, who is going to speak for group 1? Luca. So I'm going to go set my alarm.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a pleasure to summarize the discussion. There was a first point, someone said that stupid question, sorry to say that, but perhaps the other question sounds a bit more interesting indeed, but that's our task. And we had a lot of brainstorming of what is attention, and is that really a good word addressing relevant issues, or is the word itself that is misleading, or who is responsible or should be responsible in this statement to do that? And value tensions in general, some of these are already, the questions are falling then. And maybe there are differences, different tensions between different values, and maybe some of them are negotiable, some are not, or some are manageable, some are not. And particularly, I mean, it's a more general question of social life, and social life is negotiation in general. Now, whether you can have someone who's supposed to manage it, or just simply interactive, occurring between actors, and the result is something that is completely different from any intended strategy, so to speak. It's a very common discussion in social sciences. We were talking, the one of us that were in the project in Uncharted, perhaps this question really addressed one of the naivety that perhaps was in our original proposal. It would be nice for us to, as an exercise, to rewrite the proposal at the end. And in the call from the European funding, this idea that should be managed and reduced is there. And we think that's kind of weakness of this call, perhaps, and perhaps at the beginning, even our own standing. This is something that we learn. We won't agree with ourselves a couple of years later. And it's an issue of identity here. It's a question of conflict between identities. It's a, I cannot read what I wrote. There's something that was coming back in a discussion, education could be a way to mitigate, but once again, education by whom, according to which values, etc. And perhaps I think that's an opportunity lost so far in our research. In this discussion, I realized if we put ourselves in the context of illiberal regimes, doing research in China or Turkey, and we raise these questions in that context, that will be so dangerous. So maybe we have some context within the group that is a bit less liberal than the other. Perhaps we should address, to some extent, the differences in different contexts between this idea of value, managed, mitigated, perhaps missing the idea of being part of a liberal regime.
Perfect timing.
Okay. So we were group 2. We were addressing the discussion about sentence 2, provocation 2, value tensions are useful or productive. So the first point that was raised by our discussion was that we do believe that value tensions are useful and productive. Especially we think that tensions can be productive to trigger, to stimulate, to provoke some kind of change to the status quo. And then comes some other issues that we addressed that are basically how do you push them forward in order to try to embrace change, to push change a little bit, to challenge the status quo, even if you don't achieve that. Then some other points that we raised, and we contextualized some of these issues, of these first issues in the considering the cases of WP3 like Mudec or Venice, considering how much then the tensions and what they can be productive for are then pushed on the surface, on a visible dimension or not. It depends. There are different levels of tensions, depend on the process. There might be interventions, external interventions to polarize the tension between two social players. There might be something that intervenes at the level of tension by some other social player intervening. Of course, I cannot contextualize. We didn't have the time to specify context or to contextualize too much. We then discussed about the link with the provocation number 3, of course. Then we had, I think, a very nice intervention by Marta, that she's not a scientist in the part of the project. She is hosted, but she gave us a very nice and useful insight in a real work, like what do you do? Do you think that value tensions are useful or productive when you are dealing, for example, with a client, that is somehow the provocation pushed at the extreme? And she told us that basically what you try to do, of course, depends on the industry you're working, but if you work in an industry with where reputation is important, you try to address these tensions way before they can surface. So you do a kind of risk assessment analysis. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, we fragmented very early in group 2 with different value tensions, I think. Anyway, but we do agree, actually, in the end we do agree. We agree that value tensions we felt were generally useful and productive. There are obviously a set of conditions, and this comes back to what we were talking about in group 1, which underlie the fact that value tensions are useful or productive, i.e. there can be conditions in society where they are not useful and productive because the conditions that allow for them to be usefully and safely discussed are not there. But assuming you're in a broadly open, pluralistic situation, then we think, yes, value tensions are useful and productive. Why are they useful and productive? Because they lead to new moments of insight, to new understandings, to new accommodations, to change, as people said, to challenges to the status quo, and these are ways in which we progress and broadly move forward. We then got slightly sidetracked by a discussion about the difference between values and norms. But that was kind of interesting because it also led to a discussion about what we meant by shared values and some of these things. What is a shared value? kind of thing. So that went somewhere interesting, but probably didn't answer your question directly. A couple of other observations. We think that all these 4 questions are essentially the same question. So it didn't, in a sense, it didn't really matter what group you were in. You were sort of discussing the same issues, and that's probably a good thing. And fourthly, the 4th one, I think the idea of cultural policy as resolving value tensions suggests you're not in a pluralistic situation. I think in a pluralistic society, it is not the job of cultural policy to resolve value tensions, but simply to allow them to be safely expressed and explored.
Hello? Oh, okay, really hard. Wow. I add another type of tension, because in our group some tensions were not expressed, I think, because of time and because of social configuration between us. So I think there are tensions that are expressed or unexpressed. But the group didn't say that. The group said there are tensions between values and tensions within the same value. So that's the first distinction. Then there are tensions between opposed values or incommensurable values, yeah, or tensions between exclusive values or compatible values. So that's different types of tensions. Then we had a discussion about tensions where the negotiation is impossible. The only solution is the fight or the destruction. And tensions where you can negotiate. So maybe it's a matter of how you discuss and how you negotiate the tension. And then we had also the mention of like tensions internal to individuals or internal to institutions, and tensions between actors. But maybe there are not valued tensions, but that they can be. So external, internal, yeah, I think that's it. Someone want to add something?
Thanks, I'll be very brief. No. No, only joking. We had a really interesting discussion around this, and we felt that it's too much. It's too big an aim, both for policymakers, but also for practitioners. Came up very strongly. You know, this would be putting an additional demand on a sector that's already pretty stretched. You know, to solve huge ills within society. So the group over here kind of stole some of our best lines in this. Actually, we want to reframe it to say that possibly cultural policy should aim to address this. The word resolve was kind of too big, we felt. You know, file under too hard. It should potentially be a big part of the responsibility of cultural policy, but it's too much to expect culture to solve these value tensions alone. We also had a point about doing no harm as well. So if we recognise that cultural policy can't resolve these things, it certainly shouldn't add to them. We probably need a better understanding of what audiences' value tensions are. There's a lot focused on what the value tensions are within institutions, between policymakers and practitioners. But actually, if we're talking about tensions in society, we need to understand more what the tensions within our audiences are. Is that fair? Okay, great, thank you.
And thank you very much. And thank you all for keeping to time. And I think there's really, really interesting things here. And I'm going to jump in first because I have the mic and I can. But just on the last point about value tensions and audiences, one of the things that we found in the study that Oliver and I did on our triple R, there she is, his name, and is that individuals didn't feel like there was any tension involved in the kinds of, when they were engaged in and also with our choir work. People, they engaged for a reason that they wanted, but it didn't feel like a tension. So, which is interesting. The tensions always seemed to happen when there was more than one actor with more than one goal or more than one juris person or set of human beings who disagreed. So what I'd like to do now is we have exactly 19 minutes before we get a chance to have some fresh air again. It's really warm in this room. And we can maybe see if we can get the temperature turned down. But in the meanwhile, does anybody want to, I thought this was really, really interesting as a discussion, but can somebody else jump in?
What Victoria was talking about, the audience's understanding of values and potential value tensions. In relation to this, not only for this, and we did a survey, public opinion survey with 2,000 people. And one of the findings is that we asked some questions about how they consider values generated by culture and the arts for society at the individual level, at the in the context of local community. And one of the findings is that actually people do not distinguish values. So those people who highly value economic impact of culture tend to highly value artistic aspects of culture and the arts, arts activities, and personal and also arts contribution and cultural contribution to health. And they also share this belief that arts and culture can make a better society. So on the part of the public, it's really difficult to find sort of difference. Might be difficult to see where the tension is located. But this causes tension for cultural policy because people acknowledge all sorts of values. In some cases, equally, they see them very important: economic value, personal value, entertainment value, community value, social values of this sort and that sort. So the ball is thrown to policymakers again, or institutions again. So they need to choose based on certain criteria, certain reasoning. So that's one of the findings from my survey.
We also looked into things that ordinary citizens find important when it comes to culture in different ways. And one of the things, like, I would say that there are definitely, in our case, we found examples where there are tensions. We looked, did a study on petitions that were made in the period 2016 to 2022, including also the COVID period, and what people find important to advocate for when it comes to cultural things. And of course, some things are not very controversial. People make a petition to save a museum or to save a community center, and there's not a lot of opposition there. But we also stumbled into many debates actually in the Netherlands. For instance, we have the issue of the contested heritage in museums, what to do with this. We have people advocating for this, developing petitions, a lot of signatures, but also people coming up with counter petitions and saying that they should keep the traditional national heritage as it is and do not change anything. Another example in the Dutch case is the Black Pete debate, also very pro and contra debate, very nasty, often also on social media. Also, so yeah, there are definitely cases where you have these tensions very prominent, very salient. And then it's of course difficult to say if this is only the role of culture policy to do something about this, and it's not the kind of tensions you're happy about, I guess, as a policymaker or as a citizen either, I suppose. But so I wouldn't agree with the statement that individuals are that there are no tensions. It depends on what kind of activities and values you look at.
Maybe it would be useful to be more precise about what sort of tension one is talking about. I mean, there could be rational tensions, which could be explicit, and then one comes to a solution. There are emotional tensions, and then there are these fundamental identical tensions, and things when you say things become nasty, where somehow there seems to be no bridge anymore I don't know whether these three would be exhaustive, but anyway, tension is too cute a word for all this.
Yeah, it's a bit of a raw thought, but many of us are involved in this. We're coming already into a relationship with those who we're wanting to get information from in a particular position, and it's quite difficult to set about the conditions whereby those communities are able to voice their direct experiences. In other words, they're kind of aware of the kind of answers that we might be wanting to seek out. And I think there's a responsibility on all of us to think about what those methods are for working very much in a different way, I suppose, with those grassroots groups, and think about what the methods that they might be able to offer up so that we can get to a different kind of understanding of some of these difficult questions. Because I think we're already starting in a position of power or position of authority, which is quite difficult to undo. But if we examine carefully the methods that we're using, we might come to different outcomes.
I can't be alone in thinking that the term tension is completely useless, can I? What is a tension? It's opposing forces pulling a wire, a string, or whatever metaphor you choose in opposite directions. So the opposition is written into the idea of a tension. One of the bits of vocabulary I think that's really been missing is the relationship between value and interests. When people pursue particular objectives, they may be enacting an interest. I just find it really strange that that's not been on the agenda at all today. Irreconcilable interests as a way of talking about tensions, another way of describing that, or reconcilable interests. You know, I just think that it sort of seems to be a term of bureaucratic dissent that is a kind of an obstacle to thinking. I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. In your provocation, Victoria, there is the word must. And if there is the word must, we have to ask ourselves, what for? Why? And why it is important to distinguish? It is because probably, as in general, value tension are in the core of a democratic cultural policy and has not to be solved. Some tension has to be. I give you two examples. What is the legitimacy of giving the right, the cultural right of Nazi or neo-Nazi to improve their own cultural values? Is it the same? It is a kind of a Robespierrean point of view, because no freedom to the enemies of freedom. So this is a tension that demands an answer in terms of cultural policy. And the second reason is that because values are supported or related to interests, the fight between interests has to be solved. We have to give an answer in terms of public policy to some kind of inequalities that underlines, that are behind the value tensions.
I'm not sure that interests can be solved in that way. I'm thinking, as an example, 10 years ago there was a Gauguin exhibition at Tate, and the interpretive panels for that exhibition were all about the colour, form, location, various other things about the Gauguin paintings. Last year there was another Gauguin exhibition, this time at the National Gallery, and each label was about Gauguin's, what was deemed to be his life in Tahiti, and how he had not performed in the way that people thought he should. And the actual values or interests about the paintings had completely shifted. And that was policy, interest and value all working together for another outcome. And that will change again inevitably. So I think it's pretty obvious. I don't think interests stay as they are. They change, and that changes the value, and that in turn changes the policy.
So I really want to thank you to talk about interests, because for me, since I'm here in the morning, it's very clear that, for example, my organization and the Portuguese government are very aligned in the values. The public documents that talk about culture, we completely agree. But there are this interest conflict, because we want more money for arts and the Portuguese government wants to do budget consolidation. So the values are the same, but interest is different. And I think maybe it's important to address this as well in your project.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I would like to share the thanks, because really when we started working on the work 3, particularly on topic 2, we were saying so far we forgot the term interest. In the proposal there is not such a kind of neutral, out of time, the issue of value. While in the case of Liverpool and Venice, it's really a fight of big interest, and I think from now on we should never decouple the term value and interest, because otherwise it's really kind of, it's part of the mystification, you know. This is the fight, and in the case we are talking, it's really a fight between big economic interest. And once again, if we have to rewrite the proposal now, I'm sure we would have put the word interest very crucial to that. But we're still in time for the deliverables that are missing to use it back.
I'm a bit puzzled now, because I'm not at all aware that interest has been missing from these proposals. In fact, it's just, I mean, literally, it's a word in that sense, because there's right through all the case studies that I've been reading, there is the very clear sense that very often the valuation are identical. You know, people share the sense that all the good and the great and good, we all agree on liberal values, but the way it then gets interpreted into practice, this is where the interest comes in. I mean, literally, the only thing that's missing then is the word interest, and that is very easily written into the report as a different label, you know. So I think it's in there, very, very big and very clear.
Thank you, everybody. I personally enjoyed this session. I think it created a lot of interesting things, and I'm going to listen back to the recording to remind myself of what kinds of things to think about. I'm sorry that some of the questions were stupid. They were meant to, I mean, anytime you say must, you know that that's not going to, the answer is no, you know, or, but we did try to choose some that sparked discussion, and we did try to make them slightly distinctive, so it's interesting that you felt they were all kind of similar, but they kind of are because we think of them together. So the good news is that we can take a coffee break now. Oliver's gone out, so I might take his name in vain. Alain, where's Alain? Ask for, could we have a walk around campus? And I was just wondering if anybody wanted, Oliver said he'd be glad to walk some people around campus. So I'm springing this on him. But go find Oliver, and I'll go tell him that I said that we might want to take a half an hour walk, or a 20-minute walk, get some fresh air. So see you in a half an hour or in a second.